outraged about as anyone else. In fact, they would be the ones sounding the alarm, because classical liberals, as opposed to the so-called progressives who try to hide behind a liberal label, they're two different animals. Classical liberals believed in the government not passing judgment and the government staying out of your life, man. Just stay out of my life, man. They actually had a lot in common with current Tea Party folks. Smaller government equals happier life. And it's true. But this woman was put there for that reason. Lois Lerner was an attack dog. And she was sick on the American people. Not all of them, just the ones who had an opposing point of view to the current administration and the cojones to stand up and shout their message if need be. Those people had to be silenced. She was an attack dog. She did her job, the one she was put there for. But that's not the job that's supposed to be done by the person who's heading up the IRS. It's not the job that's supposed to be done, because that's supposed to be a non-political bureaucrat, someone who understands the fact that they have to be politically neutral in order to effectively do the job that they've been put in place to do. They're the type of person that's supposed to be able to get appointed when necessary because of a vacate of that position, and who can work not only under this administration, but the one that comes after that, and the one that comes after that if they decide to stay in public service that long. And it should not matter if there's a D, an R, or an I at the end of the name of whoever is running the next administration. These people are supposed to be politically neutral. It's necessary in the Department of Justice, at the IRS, and at several other government agencies that I'm not going to take the time to run down right now. It's necessary in order for them to actually do the job as it's described, to be politically neutral. You can't have justice if you're only trying to serve a political agenda. You can't treat people fairly in collecting taxes if you're trying to push a political agenda. That is unacceptable. But again, Lois Lerner did the job she was put in place to do, regardless of whether it was what she was supposed to do. There's the definition of the job, and then there's the wink, wink, nudge, nudge, here's what we want you to do. She did what the wink, wink, nudge, nudge, she did what they wanted her to do, and so now they're giving her cover. Resign when we want you to help keep you out of harm's way with the congressional stuff. And then if anything criminal comes up, we got your back. In fact, don't be surprised if they don't find some other way to charge her if she doesn't get a presidential pardon before Obama leaves office. Watch for it. I mean, they've already taken the steps. Now, I don't know about you, but it kind of irritates me. All right, I'm going to take a quick break because I didn't plan on running quite this long with that story, but I'm going to take a quick break, and then when we get back, we're going to discuss the Religious Freedom Acts. So stay with me. We'll be right back.
Go.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back. Thanks for staying with us. We are, of course, broadcasting live from historic Rowan County, Tennessee. And let's get to tonight's main topic, and that is this religious freedom stuff and the backlash that's went to it. I really don't understand why so many people are jumping on this bandwagon at this time. All I can tell you is that it's pretty obviously it's been politically orchestrated. I have concerns deep-seated about this whole thing, but there are certain things that you really need to know about the law in the first place, because there's a lot of misinformation going on out there too, and it's really important that people get the facts. This law is not particularly heinous. It does pretty much mirror the federal law of the same name. And the reason people have come out and tried to put this misinformation out there that it doesn't, it's so much worse, is there is some difference in the language. It's a little bit stronger than the federal level because it also includes some language that says, you know what, this isn't just for individuals. This can apply to businesses. But there's some things that you really need to know. There's some questions out there that I think... I came across a great article at thefederalist.com that some important questions answered, and I'd like to go over some of those with you, so bear with me, and I will go over this. Understand that giving full credit to the Federalist, and then we'll discuss opinion after that. First of all, the first question is, of course, what is RFRA, which is short for RFRA, Religious Freedom Reformation Act. Okay, and first of all, it's legislation that sets the same minimum standards for burdening the exercise of religion. Now, under the various laws, a state or the federal government, by law or other action, may not substantially burden an individual's exercise of religion unless the burden is in furtherance of a compelling government interest and is in the least restrictive means of furthering that interest. Better than 20 states, in fact 22 states, including Indiana now, and the federal government have these types of laws. So it's nothing new. In fact, Arkansas just passed a new law themselves over the weekend. I haven't heard very many people comment about Arkansas. Why is Indiana the devil and Arkansas not? They just did this. It tends to look highly politically motivated. But anyway, I'll continue next. What government interest? Another highly common question of this. Okay, so it's a lot more nuanced than the media has been pushing out there. It's talking about creating a balanced test for litigation. It puts exercise of religion on one side of the scale and then government interest on the other. If the government's interest is not important enough, literally compelling, it cannot outweigh the individual's right to practice his or her religion as he or she sees fit. Now, that sounds a little convoluted, but the bottom line is the government can't just pass a law saying, oh, we think you're being discriminatory, but we can't prove it, but it doesn't matter what we can prove, kind of thing. It sets a standard. It says, okay, here's the level, here's the scale, here's what you have to do. So, quite frankly, does this, quote, license discrimination? No. It doesn't shield anybody from discriminatory practices. It's not a sword either. It can't be used to attack people. It can only be used to defend oneself against lawsuits or administrative actions. In other words, punitive fines from a township or what have you. It cannot be used affirmatively to try to deprive others of protections of law. Basically, it means the rights of this group does not outweigh the rights of this other group, and certainly the government has little right to impose itself in these situations unless there's a more compelling reason. So how does it really work? Well, for example, Back in 2006, the Supreme Court considered a case involving a psychotropic tea that believers of a New Mexico church imbued as part of their religious ceremonies. Now, customs inspectors had seized the tea as a violation of the Federal Controlled Substance Act. The High Court applied the balancing test described in the questionnaire above. So first, no one disputed that depriving the believers of their tea would be a substantial burden on the exercise of religion. That's the religion side of the scale. Second, the federal government, it claimed it was just applying the Controlled Substance Act to everyone equally. But that is precisely why the government lost at the Supreme Court, unanimously. The government could not explain why it could not give an exemption to this little group of believers that wasn't harming anyone with its tea. And so the government's interest in uniform application of the Controlled Substance Act was outweighed by the interest of the believers in practicing their religion in peace. So religious freedom, in this case, outweighed the Controlled Substance Act. Now, this is the kind of law that typically folks on the left like. They love it when it's applied like that because it shows that the government doesn't get to reach into the hands of people that are using drugs to stop them. But in this case, it was legitimate. I mean, as legitimate as this particular practice could be. But the bottom line is, here in the States, because of the First Amendment, as long as their practices aren't causing harm or putting people in direct danger, then they're free to do pretty much whatever, and as long as it seems like there is some legitimate spiritual side to it, that's freedom of religion. Alright? So now the next question is, if there's a federal Religious Freedom Reformation Act, why do states have to have them too? Well, that comes from a different Supreme Court case, actually, because back in 1997, the High Court held that the federal government lacked the authority to impose an RFRA on the states. So, hooray! Government of limited power. Imagine that. It's kind of nice for the federal government to come out and say, oh, by the way, states do still have some rights after all. You don't see that from D.C. much, whether it's in the courts or in the standing government. So if the states wants to have an RFRA, they have to adopt them on their own. And since then, there have been now currently 22 separate states that have enacted them. Is Indiana's RFRA like others? Well, yes and no. Indiana's applies the same standard as the other RFRAs that have been talked about as far as the federal level and some other things. Substantial burden versus compelling interest and least restrictive means. In other words, even if we're going to make you do something, we have to find a way that is the least punitive, causes the least damage to you and your ability to continue to practice your faith. Indiana's RFRA is a defense not just for individuals, but also companies and corporations. Now, this is similar to the federal RFRAs after the Hobby Lobby case, which also applies to individuals, companies, and closely held corporations. But not all state RFRAs include companies and corporations, so that's the difference in some states. And again, the original federal law as it was passed didn't include companies. It was mostly directed at individuals and small groups of people, typically religious organizations. The change really hasn't been written into the federal law as much as case law has been established through the Supreme Court hearing involving Hobby Lobby versus Obamacare kind of thing. So this is the language that really has most of the people on the left upset about, because they can't stand